Something was wrong the moment he got in. I didn't know why yet, only that every instinct I had went tight, like the air had shifted in the van. I'd been driving for 3 years, long enough for the job to blur into routine. Routes, receipts, tired engines, tired people. My van was an old silver Ford with a dented door and a damp, stubborn smell that never really left. Most riders didn't notice. They were scrolling, yawning, drowning in their own lives. But when you drive strangers for a living, you pick up survival habits. A glance in the rear view before you even think to move. A quick check of the back seat, even when it should be empty. Dome light off. Doors locked fast. Little rituals that keep you safe, until the night they don't. I told myself the stories I collected were just that, stories. People with bad nights and bad luck, the sort of things that sound worse being said aloud. But there are 3 rides I can still feel in my teeth, like the taste of metal after you bite down too hard. Each one left a different bruise. One was quiet and impossible, one was loud and wrong. One left me with a smell that wouldn't wash out. I can be practical about most things, not these. Story 1: The Vanished Rider. It was raining the night she got into my van. Rain that wasn't just rain, the kind that felt like it purged the pavement, like a printer wiping the ink off a page. The wipers squeaked, the heater clicked and warmed a small circle of the windshield. I had been on shift since 6. My son had been asleep on the couch when I left. His little sneakers still sat by the door. I told myself I'd be quick. 2 hours, 3 rides, home with milk. Her request came from a neighborhood off the highway, where the houses had porches and old swings and the kind of streetlight that buzzed in a low, constant tone. She entered without looking at me, shoulders wrapped in a hooded coat that was too thin for the weather. The hood kept her face in shadow. She slid into the passenger seat like she belonged there. Quiet, small movements, hands tucked under her jacket. When she set a small backpack on her lap, a smell came up. Old water, like a basement after a heavy storm. It made my throat tighten. "Where to?" I asked. "Crossing Ridge," she said. Her voice was low, the kind you lean toward to hear. I set the destination and pulled into the street. The GPS had its usual flat voice. The radio was off. There was no talk, no awkward name reveal. That was how it started. Polite absence. People who trusted their phones more than strangers. We drove. The rain slathered the side windows and made patterns of light from passing taillights. The only sound inside was the steady hum of the engine and the breath she took now and then, shallow, conscious. A corner later, she tapped the side of the van like she was checking the texture of the upholstery. A small, deliberate noise. I glanced at her. She was watching the road. Or maybe watching nothing at all. "Long night?" I asked, because drivers are boring conversationalists, and sometimes you need to be boring to keep things human. She underscored the word with an absent nod. "Long," she said. "Just over." We took the highway and then cut off onto smaller streets. The town thinned. Porch lights were islands, orange and wet. She pointed twice to a house that fit the address, and then stopped. I pulled up under a flickering porch light. When I stopped, she reached down, picked up the backpack, and opened the door. "Wait," I said, out of habit. "Do you want me to—" She turned toward me, but because of the hood, the lower half of her face was the only thing I could see. She looked like someone waiting to be asked the right question. Her mouth moved. It might have formed words. It might have been a smile. For a full, bird-slow breath, I thought she was going to step out and slam the door shut, leaving me with the normal little thank you and the small bump of income. She didn't step out. The door closed. Not with the soft, normal closing of someone exiting a vehicle. The hinge thunked in a slightly different way, a duller sound, and there was no movement to follow. The van didn't miss anything at first. The rain hit the windshield. The wipers kept time. The porch light buzzed. But when I shifted into drive and glanced over, the passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt lay folded in the same slow curve it always did when no one had buckled. Her backpack was nowhere on the floor. The door was latched. For half a second, I assumed she had disappeared because she had stepped out and I hadn't noticed, because my mirrors sometimes miss the small things. I reached for the door handle, opened the van, leaned out. The rain hit my face. The porch light hurt my eyes. The house was dark, quiet. No footsteps on the walkway. No light through the blinds. No bag on the porch. No one on the swing. I closed the door and checked the rear view, the camera, my phone. There was no notification. There was no ping. I fumbled for the app and scrolled through trip history. Active. The trip had been accepted and started. It showed the pickup and the destination, and the timer kept running. The app's map showed a blue dot where my van was and a little profile icon indicating the passenger. The app still registered her, as if whatever had happened was a problem of meat and not code. I called her. The line rang and went to voicemail. No one answered. I called again. The call dropped. I felt ridiculous, standing under that weak porch light, rain soaking through my jacket, trying to reconcile the van's empty interior with the active trip timer on my phone. I checked the back seat. I checked under the seats. I got out and walked to the side of the van and peered under. Mud streaked my shoes where a neighbor's dog had crossed my path minutes before. The house's driveway was empty of cars. There were no footprints beyond the salt-slicked stones. The smell, that old, wet smell, lingered for a moment near the door before sinking into the fabric and perhaps into my memory. I canceled the trip. The app asked why. I typed "no show" like a machine and hit send. The money for the ride was pending, held in some digital limbo. I pulled back into the street and drove the route again, thinking maybe I'd missed her on the sidewalk, walking off into the rain. Nothing. Houses closed like shells. The porch lights buzzed. When I called the support line, the automated voice was patient and practiced. "Please contact local authorities if you are in danger," it said. The words were oddly cold over the tinny speaker of my phone. They meant paperwork. They meant a process that would probably end with a ticket for me or an apology in an email. I drove on until I found a gas station with a bright canopy and sat under it, letting the heater dry my jeans while I thought. I kept glancing at the passenger seat. Empty. The seat belt tucked like a spare limb. I reported it to the small-town police as a missing person at the suggestion of the app's helpline. They took my statement politely and wrote nothing fancy, but I felt the weight of their caution. "We can file a report," the officer said, "but do you have any description? Any last scene?" I told him the hooded coat, the smell, the way she didn't look at me. He took all the notes. Then he said the sort of thing he does to calm people. "We'll check nearby cameras. Maybe the neighbor has something." Cameras. The word lodged in my throat. The town had cheap cameras, gas stations, a couple of porches strung up by people who liked the idea of security. If someone had caught her leaving or being taken, maybe there would be evidence. If not, I would have nothing but an empty seat and a phone that insisted the trip had occurred. They looked. The officers came to the station, and later they called me back to say there was nothing on the nearest footage that showed her getting out. The porch camera showed my van pulling forward, lights reflecting off slick pavement. It showed the van in motion and then paused frames where the door opened and then closed. In one frame, the passenger door is ajar a fraction of an inch. In the next, the glass gleams with rain and the seat is empty. There is no figure caught walking away. There is no bag sitting on the steps. The frames were too grainy to tell me anything useful beyond the van's outline. "Could someone have taken her?" I asked, voice flat. "Could someone have jumped her as the door opened?" "It's possible," the officer said. He was careful. "But we don't have anything to suggest foul play in the footage. Did you remember seeing anyone else?" "No," I said. "It's just, she was here. She was in my van. The app says she was still on it." The officer left me with the line that still felt incomplete. Sometimes people get out and forget something, go back in, change their mind, or the app glitches. He wrote it on his paper in a loop like it could hold the possibility in place. I wanted to shout that an app glitch was not a human vanishing. But the officers dealt in probabilities and evidence. My experience was messy and private. That night I drove again, unable to sit in the quiet apartment with the refrigerator humming, unable to let the van sit full of passenger scent. I kept thinking of the way she had moved, too light, like someone who had been taught to step silently. The old water smell haunted me. At one point I saw a girl on the sidewalk in a hoodie, and I thought it was her. I swallowed against the panic and pulled over. She waved at me, laughing with a friend. I felt foolish and wrong. The town light blurred into orange. For days I altered my routes. I learned to check the seat 3 times before locking the doors. I found myself imagining explanations. She had hallucinated her destination. She had stepped out and been carried away by someone in a truck. She had left the bag under her coat on the seat, and the wind took it. I told friends at work that it was probably a fluke, a technical glitch, something to forget. They said, "You're jumpy." They meant it kindly. 2 weeks later, the same kind of rain. I was driving down the river road, headlights reflecting off the water. A call came in from the app, a short fare to a hospital on the edge of town. It was a woman, older, voice tight. She got in and told me she had been waiting for an Uber and had been redirected. As I set the destination, she told a story without really asking if I wanted to hear. They found a backpack, she said, hoarsely, like it was the only thing she could manage to tell a stranger. My palms went cold against the wheel. I asked where. She named a place along the river, downstream from where the town dumped morning runoff. My mind snapped to the damp smell of the van the night the hooded woman had taken my ride. I listened as she told me how they'd found the backpack and how there were wet footprints and a swing that had been moving though no one had been there. The word drowned never left her mouth, but the image hung. The mill, the river, old stories of kids playing too close. It took 2 officers and a fisherman and a pair of rubber gloves to get the bag out of the muck. Inside were scraps of fabric, a phone with no password that had been water-sodden and dead, photographs that blurred with exposure. There was no username on the app. There was no ID in the pockets. The officers who had been taking reports called me and asked to talk again. The mood on the line was the same, careful, procedural, polite. They asked me to come in to identify the bag. We wound through the suburbs to a cluster of apartments near a creek. The building had old balconies and peeling paint. People said the complex had been cheapened into rentals a decade ago, and the landlord never quite fixed the wiring. The porch light at the stairs blinked on and off like a stutter. When we pulled up, she didn't get out. She turned to me, and even in the diffuse orange of the streetlight, I could see she had those small, tired lines around her mouth. She asked me to wait a moment. I kept the van running because the cold was particular, and shutting down a good, warm engine invites more wear. She rummaged in the coat and took out a small cloth-wrapped object, a child's shoe, tiny and mud-stained. She held it to her chest as if it was a locket. "I forgot that was in my coat," she said. Her voice did that thing people do when they are about to move into private territory with a stranger. "My niece, she lost it down by the creek. She stopped and swallowed. The microphone pretends not to hear empathy. I kept the van still. She folded the coat around the shoe again and handed it to me. "Can you hold this?" she said. "Just for a second. I'll be right back." She stepped out of the van and walked up toward the stairs. I watched her go, the coat's hood swinging, a shape among shapes. I don't like leaving strangers' things in the van unattended, but there was something in the way she had asked that made me trust it. A quick plea, a soft urgency. I nodded and told her I would. She didn't look back. She climbed the stairs into the building. The porch light thinned. She did not come back. 10 minutes passed. 20. The coat lay folded on the seat like a folded hand. The shoe poked out from the bundle and smelled faintly of leaf rot and river water. I set the heater to a low hum and watched the stairs through the windshield. I turned the radio off to listen for her footstep. The night filled with the small sounds of people living. A dog barked. Someone laughed once and then stopped. A TV mumbled. The complex's front door stayed shut. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I called the number she had left for a friend on the ride. The friend sounded confused. She was there, the friend said. She said she needed 5 minutes. We thought she was inside. I walked up the stairs, the cold stealing along the collar of my jacket. The building's lobby smelled like old carpets and someone else's takeout. No door was open. I knocked on the stairwell door. It answered with hollow silence. I asked a woman by the mailboxes if she had seen a woman with a coat go inside. She looked at me like I was late for something that didn't matter. "I saw someone go up," she said slowly. "I thought it was one of them's girlfriends." I went around to the side of the building where the light was worse and where the creek grazed the property like a scar. The ground was a halting mess of mud and frozen puddles. Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "and image of the coat folded like a small absence". Você está no meio de uma frase-pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Prosody. Story 3. The Passenger Who Wasn't There. The third one began with a job at dawn, when the town still smelled of diesel and stale coffee. I was driving someone to the outskirts where the old highway split into service roads. The sun was a pale thing behind cloud and fog. I was tired in a way that pressed into my rib cage. He got in the front seat without asking, a man maybe in his 40s, wearing a hooded sweatshirt with the hood down. He put his hands on the dash and looked at me like he expected we knew each other. He had a way of leaning that made the van feel smaller, like he moved in motion to fit a space that might not have been meant for him. "Airport?" he asked. The GPS confirmed it. He told me he was headed out of town. He didn't give a name. He had a ticket, he said. He paid on the app, and the trip began. We drove for a while in silence. He hummed under his breath at odd intervals. Once he asked me a question about the radio, and then changed his mind, then laughed small and said, "Don't worry, man, I talk too much sometimes." He kept his eyes forward. He had a knapsack beside him with a leather strap that had seen better days. The van took the bends, and he watched the trees pass like someone paging through photographs. At a stoplight, he lifted his hand and placed it on my knee. It was the sort of contact that can be casual between people who've traveled together, or the sort that is a crossing of a boundary. My reflex was to unhook the radio, to deflate the moment, to point at the GPS. "We good?" I said, casual. He nodded and slid his hand away. We left the main road and took a back route cut through an old industrial area, the kind of place I avoided usually. The light had that bluish early morning glare. The GPS recalculated. He didn't mind. He kept watching the map on his phone the way some people watch the weather radar. We passed a closed storefront with a porch light that hummed despite no one living above it. The van's heater turned off for a second I didn't notice, and the silence pressed. The man sighed, the sound like a window being wiped clean of breath. He told me, in the kind of voice that folds confidences into the ordinary, that he had a daughter. He said her name only once. His hands tightened around the knapsack strap. He said that he hadn't seen her in a long time, that custody hearings and the working nights had made space thin between them. He kept looking at the knapsack and then at me as if checking if I was following a story he'd told 100 times and never quite finished. At a red light near a rusting guardrail, he said, "Could you pull over for a minute? I have to take something out of my bag." He lifted the heavy leather flap and dug with a small practiced motion. He pulled out a doll wrapped in cloth. It was the kind of thing kids lose, a small, ragged mouth, threadbare hair matted with dust. He showed it to me like a proof of care. "It's a long story," he said. "My girl dropped it off at her mom's. I promised I'd pick it up." His eyes were bright in a tired way. I believe people more when they tell stories to fill the silence. I told myself I was doing him a courtesy. He stepped out of the van, saying he'd be right back, and walked to the building across the street. He crossed under a flickering light. He looked back at me once and waved, and I waved back. Something about the gesture felt final and ordinary. He did not come back. At first, I waited. 5 minutes, 10. My body made itself small in the driver's seat, like a person trying to fit under a table during an earthquake. I watched the man go up the stairs and vanish into a door that hadn't yet opened. I called him. No answer. I called the number he had on the app. It went straight to voicemail. I got out and walked across to the building. It was a pawn shop that looked closed, its metal gate pulled all the way down. The light above the door hummed. I went to the back alley and listened for footsteps. None. The man's knapsack lay abandoned on the sidewalk, like a punctuation mark. Open, papers peeking from the seam, a child's crayon rolled out like a dropped tooth. The doll was not there. My heart started a rhythm I'm ashamed to describe, fast and small, like an insect. I called dispatch. The police came and took notes and fingerprints of the bag, even though I told them I didn't mind. It was routine, they said. They asked if I had the seatbelt fastened. I said yes. They asked if I had gone inside the building. I had, but there was no one there. They asked if I had seen anyone take him. I had not. The knapsack had little in it: a folded ticket stub, a receipt, a napkin with a name written in pen, and a half-eaten sandwich. It smelled faintly of oil and something else, a sweetness that I couldn't place. The officers put the bag into an evidence locker and told me they'd be in touch. The van smelled like the sandwich for days. Later, when they pulled the city's traffic camera footage, the frame caught me rolling forward, the man stepping toward the door, and then an empty sidewalk. There was a single frame where the man was in the doorway, and then nothing. No one else appeared. It was like a cut in a film where a shot is missing, an editing trick. It did not make sense. They told me about similar calls, people last seen walking, last seen in vehicles, but not in a pattern that added up to a single explanation. They told me about human things like memory errors and about recorded errors that made people think they had been somewhere differently than they had been. They were tired of patterns that didn't help. They were kind, but their kindness was the kind that told you not to expect miracles. After he disappeared, I drove the route he had been headed for and found no sign of him. The ticket stub had an airline's name that went out of town. The passengers list didn't match him. The sandwich wrapper had a shop's name, but no camera showed him there.
Você é narrador ou palestrante autoritário. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. It was like he had been a person assembled out of pre-existing pieces and then removed mid-construction. The police called it inconclusive. The app opened the case and sent me a polite email. I kept the door locked for 3 days. I started keeping a small camera hidden on the dash. Not for anything grand, just to know that if something happened, there would be a record that didn't rely on memory. I told myself cameras were proof against the slippery nature of recollection. I told myself that comfort was the same as truth. There were nights after that when I dreamed of the van seats folded into negative space, voids where people had been. I woke up checking the interior by touch, not by sight, tracing the contour of a cushion as if someone's shape might be cached in foam. The 3 scars. By the time these 3 things had happened, my habits had hardened. I did not take rides into parts of town with water in the name. I left the interior light on sometimes after a pickup, a little beacon. I learned how to photograph abandoned items and text them to myself. I listened for smells that told me more than a face ever could. The river image, the damp coat, the child's shoe. Those objects attached themselves to the way I organized my life. I drove my son to school with a vigilance that felt like armor. I checked the back seat before I locked up. I slept lighter. People asked me if I worried about being blamed. They asked if I worried about the police or lawsuits. The truth was simpler and worse. I worried about the way memory is porous, about how easily anything you think you know can be scrubbed away by a missing frame on a camera or a dropped call. The van had once been a machine for moving people and things across town. It had become a machine that kept ghosts, not supernatural in the old sense, but ghosts as absences that refused to be explained. Once, months after the last disappearance, a woman sat in the back and said, "My sister's friend had a van like this." She hummed a tune under her breath and then said, "You ever get the feeling you're being watched from the seat next to you?" I laughed, which was the wrong sound. She told me about a time she saw a hooded figure standing by the river and about a coat on a branch, soaked and empty. The town was repeating itself in rumors like a poorly made film loop. The stories collected around the creek and the porch light like damp leaves. The police kept tabs. They called me sometimes to ask if I had new footage or had noticed anything odd. Once, they brought in a detective from the next county who had an approach that was almost human in its bluntness. "You know how people fill in blanks," he said. "When something is missing, the mind will search for patterns to make sense. Sometimes there's an explanation. Sometimes there's just loss." His words made sense and felt thin. They do not satisfy the way a closed door satisfies. You want the latch to click so you know the work is done.
A van refused to click. Now, whenever it rains, I feel it in my fingers before I see the droplets. The rain presses itself against the glass like a hand wanting to come in. I park with my back to the curb, where I can see anyone approaching. I leave the dome light on for a breath after every fare, as if illumination could hold the world together for a second longer. My son asks why I sometimes drive the long way home. I tell him there are roads I don't like. He nods, because children are good at accepting that some answers are for grown people. On nights when the town is quiet and the heater clicks, I can still see them in the edges. The hooded coat, the shoe turning in my palm, the man's hand on my knee. I try to arrange them into a narrative that holds, but the images resist. They are fragments, like film frames in a can, missing the reel that would make them whole. I have learned to live with the empty frames. I have learned to check the seatbelt even when no one is there. Yesterday, on a rainy shift, a notification came through. A request from a woman named Lena. She was 2 blocks away, she said, at a house with a porch light that stuttered. I pulled up, and the porch light buzzed exactly where the old woman from the first story had come and gone. My hands were steady. The van smelled faintly of river water from a passenger who had sat for too long. I thought about canceling. I thought about all the things I've learned. The app gave the 3-minute countdown, and then a silhouette slid into my van, smaller than I remembered, hood up. She tapped twice on the vinyl beside her. The rain pattered, and the ride started. I glanced at the seatbelt, at the empty space, at the door. I felt the same tiny knot of dread settle into my bones. "Where to?" I asked. My voice was the same as it ever was. She didn't answer at first. She looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw a face I recognized from the grain of an evidence photo. It wasn't a person I could name. It wasn't even a person. It was a mouth half smiling. The hood kept her face half in shadow. She smelled like rain. She said simply, "Anywhere." I drove. The road pulled us away from the lights and toward the river like a magnet. The wipers beat time. The heater clicked on and off. I reached for the belt reflexively and found my hand empty. There was a weight beside me, then a silence, then a smell like old water. I glanced over. The seat was empty. I stopped the van in the middle of the road. The rain made a steady, even sound on the roof. The porch lights behind me blinked in the distance. My phone still showed an active trip. The app showed a profile icon at my location. I called the number associated with the ride. It went to voicemail. The only thing I had now was the memory of a silhouette, the grainy recognition of a face that shared a mouth with a photo from months ago, and the way the wet air filled the van like a scent that would not be swatted away. Through the glass, the river looked like a smear of mercury, a moving thing that didn't care about names. The bell over the door sounded small as a cough when I stepped in. Heat and detergent met me like an old friend, humid, chemical, honest. Machines lined the walls in flaking chrome. A humming chorus filled the room, washers sloshing, dryers tumbling like far-off thunder. A television bolted to the ceiling showed a blank blue screen. Somebody had left a paperback open on a folding table, spine cracked. A woman folded linen at a counter near the back. An older man counted change into rolls beside the coin machine. A child traced circles on the condensation of a window pane and watched the river through fingerprints. "Morning," I said, because it felt like manners. The woman looked up. She had dark hair pulled into a practical knot, a scar at the edge of her lip that made her smile precise. Her shirt read "Pier Laundromat" in faded letters. Under the counter was a jar of mismatched buttons and a stack of municipal flyers. "Can I help you?" she asked. I held up the ribbon on my finger. I didn't show the photos yet. The little piece of cloth looked small and ridiculous in my palm, but it had weight now, like something that wanted to be read. She leaned in, curious in a way that belonged to people who spent their nights near steam and rumor. She told me her name, Rosa, and when I said I was looking into things that happened at night, she didn't ask for credentials. People who worked this shift traded in details, not paper. "A lot of folks come and go," she said. "Fishermen, men from the fish market, the night watch at the warehouses. Tow drivers now and then, the boys who sleep in their vans." "Why? Did you find that near the pier?" "On the river road," I said, "not far from here." Rosa looked at the ribbon again. "That's like the ones kids tie to kites," she said, "or to boats so they know where they left them. But this, I found one last week, tied to the bench out on the promenade, just past the bait shop. There was—" she hesitated, fingers folding cloth with the practiced habit of someone who liked things to end folded and squared. There was a little toy on the bench. No name, just— she made a motion with her hand, like closing a lid. "Did anyone else see it? Anyone take it?" "A kid and his father walked by. The father laughed, and the kid tried to grab it, and the mother said, 'Leave it for the next child.' That's how it goes, right? People leave things and we pass them along." Her eyes went to the window, as if she could see that stretch of promenade through glass and rain. But the next day some men from the docks came by looking at something in their hands. They were nervous. They didn't want to be seen. "One of them had a jacket with a thread like that blue," she said, tapping the ribbon, "thin as a hair, faded. He left quick. I thought nothing of it at the time." "Did you see his face? Does he come here?" "No, he kept his hat low." No, he kept his hat low. But the waterfront gets creative. People leave messages for the tide. "Did you ever take anything off the cars?" Louis folded his hands across his belly. "We inventory. Paper bags in the trunk, a toolbox, sometimes a diaper bag. Most is worthless. But once we pulled a van and somebody had left a folder like that. Papers, photos, stacked neat. Come to think of it." He blinked, and for a moment the conversation was a line of memory he pulled at like a thread. "We have a docket for that one. It's in the back office. You got a minute?" He led me through a chain-link gate and into a trailer that smelled of oil and instant coffee. The clerk at a desk blinked and waved a hand toward a metal filing cabinet. Lewis fished out a folder, dusted it as if the dust were a cover for guilt. Inside were photographs, people folded to faces, a list of tags, times, and dates. Some entries were mundane, VIN numbers, where a vehicle was found. One entry had scrawled on the margin in a hand that trembled, "Found ribbon on bench, blue thread, child's toy, traced to Pier Laundromat, no name." Beneath it, in different ink, "Owner unknown." I sat back, the handwriting folded like a map. The paper told me something I already suspected. The objects were moving through a system, not random, not art. Someone was placing tokens, and, if Lewis's docket was to be believed, someone was leaving them near places where cars went to die. "Who brought it in?" I asked. Lewis shrugged. Night Watch called it in. They were patrolling. Said a van left backed up to the water, doors ajar, and the tide had been flirting with the bumper. Saw footprints, nobody in 'em. Called me, said it looked staged. Staged for who? For the people who watch, Lewis said, or for the people trying to be found, or for both. You can never tell with the river. I stood to go. Outside, the sky had the gray clarity of someone who'd had time to think and decided there wasn't much to do about the weather. I slid into the van and felt the ribbon under my palm like an answer that wouldn't be given. At the corner where the pier met the main road, someone had leaned a shopping cart against the lamppost. A man stood by it, smoking in the wet, his face in profile, a silhouette like a coin. He didn't move when I pulled up. He watched me the way a sentinel does. There was something in the set of his shoulders that told me he didn't belong to the laundromat or the tow lot. He had the shape of someone who'd been waiting. As I opened the van door, the man stepped forward. Up close, I could see the glint of a small thing tied at his wrist, a piece of fabric with the same blue thread. My chest pinched in a way I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Recognition, like being handed a memory you didn't ask for. He smiled without any warmth. "Stay," he said. The word hung between us, and for a beat I couldn't tell if he was making a joke or lending a creed. "That's not mine," I said, and the lie felt like a smooth stone in my mouth. He tilted his head. "Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is. Maybe it means something different when it's on you. You holding it, walking around with that ribbon on your mirror. Someone might think you belong to the river now." I didn't answer. Inside, the folder pressed against my side. My son was somewhere, asleep or poring over cereal boxes. This stranger was a reminder that the work of staying could be noticed by those who preferred the other option, leaving. "Just keep going," the man said. He turned and walked toward the pier. As he moved, I saw the ribbon tied to his wrist flap against his coat like a flag. He didn't look back. For a long time I sat in the van after he left, the engine ticking as it cooled. The heater had gone cold. The river went on with its indifferent work. The tow lot and the laundromat were behind me like small islands of light. The ribbon on the rear view felt colder somehow, or perhaps it was my hands. I started the van and pulled away, following a route Luis had roughly sketched. If the ribbons were a language, someone was writing sentences along the water. If they were a map, someone was building a map with the deliberate slowness of a person who couldn't be hurried. I drove toward the river lot, the pier shrinking in the rear view. The city opened and closed around me, alleys with doors that were never quite shut, lights that made the night less threatening and more exact. I had a clue, which was often the same as having a promise. It would not be enough. It rarely was. But staying had given me motion, and motion had teeth. I thought about my son's shoes on the wrong feet, the biscuit crumbs, the small things that kept our life true. I thought about the man with the ribbon on his wrist, and the way he said stay like a warning that could be loving or dangerous. I thought about the photo folder, the pile of faces that had become my weather. There was a name on Luis's docket, scrawled and almost polite, an address at the edge of the docks, a berth number, and a unit I'd been meaning to check. The rain had started again, soft at first, and then into a sheet that blurred the lights. I drove through it, the wipers keeping a tempo with my pulse, and turned onto a narrow lane that ran along the edge of where the city met the water. At the mouth of the lane, someone had tied a ribbon to the fence. It fluttered in the rain, heavy and soaked, like it had been waiting longer than I had. I stepped out, with the photo folder clutched in both hands. The ribbon didn't say a single word, just hung there, dark with water, pointing me toward the place Luis had marked. So I followed it, because at that point, turning back felt worse than whatever was ahead. The night tightened around me as I walked, every sound swallowed by the rain, every step feeling like it wasn't entirely mine. And that's where I'll stop, because what happened next is a story for another night. If you want to hear it, come back tomorrow.
Novas, tristes histórias aqui, todos os dias.